When it comes to your digital strategy, are you only looking at the sales or revenue that comes out of it? Because if you are missing a major part of the story and what data can tell you about your actual success with your strategy. In today's video, we are going to dive into KPIs, key performance indicators, and how you can use leading, current, and lagging indicators to judge your success throughout your entire strategy. When it comes to sales, our ultimate sign of success, the ultimate scoreboard, is ultimately the revenue we put up. It's the sales that we close. However, for many people, especially in the B2B world, that sales cycle can be 6 months, 9 months, it can be 18 months or 24 months even for some people. And when you combine that with a digital strategy that focuses on content and being educational and building trust at scale, it can be even longer. So that's why it's super important when you're actually measuring the data and looking at the success of what you're doing, that you're looking throughout the entire life cycle of your strategy. So one way to do this is to look at leading indicators, current indicators, and lagging indicators. And what that does for you is it shows you and allows you to measure different aspects of your strategy to keep you on track. Even if your sales haven't caught up yet, you'll see through your leading indicators that you're on the right track and you're moving in the right direction, and ultimately success will come. So let's break down what I mean by leading, current, and lagging indicators. A leading indicator is a data point that tells you ahead of the system that things are going well. A current indicator is something that is saying currently in the system, here's what's in process. And then a lagging indicator is telling you the output, it's telling you the final results. When you combine those all together, you'll get a full picture or a full data set of how your system's performing. And in this case, your system is your digital strategy. It's important to measure each stage of those. And it's important to identify what's called key performance indicators, or one or two indicators at each stage that you've identified or you and your team have identified as being very indicative of the success at that stage. Oftentimes, this is a combination of activity goals. So things like content you're creating, meetings you're having, proposals you're writing, as well as some things that are more of a metric on the actual output of the system. So things like newsletter subscribers or sales, or things that are more like impressions on your content, the kind of stuff that is the result of the activity. And you usually want to have one or two of both. So and you're in your system and your success, either you as an individual or you coaching your employees and managing your team, you can say, here's the activity goals that we need to be doing at each stage to make sure we're successful. And then here's the result goal at each stage to show the activities are actually working. So let's now break down some indicators that you can use at each stage. So let's now start at leading. And this is where I personally spend the most time when it comes to coaching sales reps and coaching teams. Because oftentimes, as anyone who's been doing any kind of selling or marketing knows, the leading indicators or the very start of the system is where a lot of the work is done. So when it comes to your digital strategy, there's a few key indicators I like to look at. Most of them focus around content creation. So one of the things I like to do is track the amount of social posts I'm doing. This is a good indicator of the amount of content I'm putting out in more of that short form basis. I also like to track things like blog post creations. So more of that long form type creation. So how many blog posts am I doing each month? How many newsletters am I sending out with those blog posts? Or you can even do things like webinars. So you're just trying to track how much content you're creating at the very high end of your digital strategy. If you're in a more direct seller role, you can even do things like tracking the amount of outreaches you've had, right? So how many messages you send out to people, how many emails did you send out, how many invites did you send to a webinar? All those things that you want to be tracking that basically say at the very top of the funnel, how much content or educational content am I creating? How am I building up that reach for my business? And how am I getting in front of people? Those are the type of leading indicators that you want to have in your business. From there, once you create the content, then we're going to move on to the current indicators, the type of things that are saying, based on our strategy, how are we effectively reaching people right now? So this is where you start looking at things like impressions on your posts, impressions on your website, number of email subscribers you have, as well as things like number of leads generated, right? So if you have some sort of lead magnet or you have some sort of call to action on your website, how many leads are you generating? And this is data you can pull from your CRM, from your analytics tools. Again, depending on where the data point is, you're going to have your areas you're going to go back and track these things. And especially for sales, a really important indicator from the current stage that I like to look at is also pipeline size. That's kind of a nice way of looking at leads, the quality of the leads, and the overall potential that you have within your sales system. You'll notice with these current indicators that they're less focused on the activity side, because again, at the very top of the funnel, the leading indicators, things like the amount of content you're creating, will ultimately lead into the current indicators, which are things like leads generated, pipeline size, and the impressions. You will not get impressions on your content if you're not creating the content. And that's why it's important to measure those leading activity indicators before you start worrying about these current indicators. But these current indicators are a really good sign of what is to come. So again, you haven't realized sales yet when you have a pipeline, or you haven't realized sales yet when you have impressions on your content. But if we know how long our sales cycle is, we know how long it takes somebody to move through that buyer's journey, at this stage, we can start forecasting the lagging indicators. So I do this all the time with my clients. I do it in our personal business too. If I know that on average, a pipeline deal tends to move in somewhere around 60 or 90 days, you can say, okay, at this stage, I have $100,000 in my pipeline. I know my close rate is 50%. I know it takes 60 days to close, so you can actually start to forecast the kind of sales that you can get. So again, this is why it's just really important to understand that your sales system is a system, and these different indicators will allow you to not only track your activity better and track your performance better, but it actually allows you to forecast what is to come. So now let's talk about those things to come, and that is the lagging indicators. So this is the scoreboard of our success, right? This is where you look at number of closed deals, or maybe your total revenue for the month. Or you can do even things like ROI if you're talking about ad spend and marketing spend, or your just general costs associated with your digital strategy. Those are all lagging indicators that come at the very end of your sales cycle. Of course, this is the fun part. This is where we get paid, but this oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, can be 6 months out from those leading indicators and things and activities that you're doing. So when you're talking with your team and you're talking about your sales success and you're tracking the ultimate success of your digital strategy, yes, your revenue goals, your deals closed, or deals sourced from digital strategy, that is all lagging indicators that you'll be tracking. But hopefully by the time you're tracking that, you've understood the entire process that gets you there. So now when you take them all together, you have the leading, the current, and the lagging indicators. You now have metrics for your entire sales system. And when you combine those things together, you can even do things like measuring the entire length of it and looking at cycle time. You can look at close rates. You can look at different breakdowns of lead sources and how they came through. There's tons of other things you can measure, but it requires that you map out that entire process to start, and you actually start to collect that data at each stage of the process. Okay, so now let's talk about some actual practical applications you can have when it comes to using leading, current, and lagging indicators. How I do this personally in my business and how I coach my clients is to first start and identify what those indicators might be. So go through each stage of your process, think about your digital strategy and how you're going to run it, what kind of content you're going to create, what kind of conversion points you have, what kind of lead magnets you use. Look at your CRM and see which data you can pull from that, and do a general mapping of the entire process. Once you have that process laid out, then you can start to identify key performance indicators, or KPIs. So again, at each stage, leading, current, and lagging, I tend to like to have 2 to 3 different indicators that I can be tracking on a regular basis. I try and have some that are activity-based and some that are result-based. That way, from a sales perspective, I know I have activities I need to be doing each week that will lead to results at each stage of the process. So go through the process for your business, map those out, and then again, identify 1, 2, 3 key performance indicators at each stage that make sense to track for you. And then when it comes to actually tracking, again, it probably depends on the software you're using, whether it's an analytics tool, whether it's your CRM. But ultimately, I'm kind of old school, and I will actually go back and just create a simple Google Sheets, and I will update that Google Sheet every single week. I will manually pull that data from my analytics software or from my CRM or from my website. And yes, I could probably set up some fancy automation. And yes, I have set up a little bit of fancy automation. But actually, for me to check it manually each week forces me to go in, look at the data, see what's going on, and update my spreadsheet. It typically takes me about 30 to 45 minutes each week to do this. But It absolutely keeps me accountable for the activities and the results at each stage. And I think most importantly, this is something I love to emphasize with people too, is that by tracking across that entire sales process and manually looking at it every single week, it allows you to intervene much earlier on in the process. So what I mean by that is oftentimes in sales, we have the oh no moment of looking at our sales and saying we're not where we need to be. But if you're tracking it and you know that your current indicators, your pipeline size, your leads being generated is healthy, and you know you're doing activity earlier on in that leading stage, you can feel confident in saying, okay, well, this is a small dip currently in our sales, but the other indicators further up show things are good. Or more often than not, too, you have a lot of good sales. We all know that roller coaster sales cycle, right? You might have some good sales coming in, but if you're keeping up to date and every single week looking at those KPIs in current and leading, you might say, I haven't done a webinar or a blog post in 2 months. Or you might say, our impressions are down on all of our content. Or our number of leads being generated or our pipeline size is not where it needs to be. But if you look at that every single week, you can intervene quickly. You can ramp up activity. You can do whatever you need to do to make sure your KPIs get back to that good, happy green zone. But if you don't know that data, you're not looking at it, you're just responding to that lagging indicator of sales, it's going to be way too late for you to intervene, and you're going to have much more of that crazy roller coaster ride when it comes to your revenue. So I highly recommend you create a spreadsheet, start super simple. Again, you can do fancy software, you can do the crazy tables, but I would just recommend keeping it really simple. Do a column for every single month of the year, and then have your leading, your current, and your lagging indicators that you're going to track. And every single week, go in with your team, look at that data, talk about it, and allows you to intervene and allows you to more accurately forecast your success for those lagging indicators. Because the ultimate goal of doing this is to give you the peace of mind that you are doing the right things and that you can confidently say, my activities are right, my performance is right, and the results will come.